Law and Order, Statistical Victims Unit, Episode 4, Research Design. In the original research system, statistically based investigations are considered especially heinous. In Houston, Texas, the dedicated scholars who investigate these vicious problems are members of an elite squad known as the Statistical Victims Unit, aka DSP. These are their stories. Alright. So last video we discussed research paradigms, and there are three, really two and then a mix of the two. Quantitative research, which deals with numbers, quantitative variables. Qualitative research, which deals with categories and descriptions. You can do statistical analysis once you summarize the categories by counts of their frequency or look at their relative frequency. And then there's mixed methods where you use both, giving you a more complete picture of what is actually happening in the phenomenon being studied. Okay, so we're going to talk about different designs. We're going to talk about some quantitative designs, and then we're going to talk about some qualitative designs, and then of course for mixed designs you would employ at least one quantitative design and at least one qualitative. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is talk about observational studies. You want to just observe people's behavior as it already exists and see what you find. So one thing you might do is see how many fruits and vegetables people eat each day or how many they report that they eat, and then measure their waist circumference and see if there's a relationship. So that might be a descriptive study unless you're trying to show some sort of cause and effect, and then we'll talk about that later. If you're just describing the relationship, then it would just be a descriptive study. It describes patterns and trends but does not seek to establish a causal relationship. So one thing that people have done descriptive studies on is the consumption of diet soda and adult women, adult men, in separate studies, weight. And what they found in general is that the more diet soda a person drinks, on average, the more a person weighs. Now, that does not establish when they just observe what people do naturally, when no one's been assigned to drink diet soda and then their weight has been watched to see whether it goes up and down. You just see what happens in the wild. You can't decide what causes what, but you can notice that there is this association that as people drink more diet soda, their weight tends to increase. Now, is it because the diet soda itself is making them heavy? We don't know. Is it because, like this cartoon says, now I can eat anything? Are people eating more because they feel like they're saving calories by drinking diet soda? Or is it that people don't drink diet soda unless they're already heavy? And that's just, kind of one of those things you do. Once you get heavy, you think, okay, I'll cut back on soda calories, and so you start drinking diet soda. So we don't even know, based on just an observational study, where it shows that there is this tendency that the more diet soda a person consumes in a day, the more, on average, people tend to weigh. Just because that's been established, we have no idea what causes what. Okay, causal comparative study. This is where people have an observational study and they actually take some special measures to attempt to establish a causal relationship when the independent variable cannot be manipulated by the researcher. In a minute, we're going to talk about experiments. Things like diet soda, you could do an experiment with. And when you can, that's what people are expected to do. But there are occasions when it's just flat unethical or impossible to conduct an experiment. And so people do a causal comparative study. Sometimes it's just almost impossible to get people to accept that the study has been designed well enough to control for any other factor that cause and effect can be established. It can be done, it's just very hard. It took a long time in the case of smoking and lung cancer for people, the Surgeon General, the court system, people in general to accept that smoking causes lung cancer because they couldn't do it in an experiment. Okay, why can't they do it in an experiment? Well, as we're going to talk about in a second, in an experiment, you have to assign people at random. You randomly assign the explanatory variable, the treatment, in this case smoking, to people, and you watch and you see what happens. And so what they would have had to do an experiment with smoking and lung cancer was take a bunch of volunteers and randomly assign some of them to, say, smoking 1 pack a day, randomly assign another group to smoke 2 packs a day, and then have a control group that didn't smoke at all, and then sit back and wait and watch the cancer grow. And that's just totally unethical. You can't do that. And so what they had to do was just observe what actually happened, and that was that smokers tended to have greater incidence of lung cancer. And what the tobacco companies would say is, well, people who are more likely to get lung cancer for some reason are attracted to smoking. And so they would throw that back, and it was very hard to refute that. So causal comparative studies, you know, they're just necessary because sometimes you can't assign people behaviors that are to their detriment, for sure. I mean, you know, you can't, if we want to know if taking drugs causes low birth weight in babies, you cannot randomly assign some pregnant women to use heroin to see if their babies come out with low birth weight compared to the group that doesn't get assigned using heroin. You just can't do those things. It's not ethical. All right. Another quantitative design that can be done just from observation are correlational studies, and these are similar to a descriptive study, but with a correlational study, the variables are thought to be related in a linear fashion. And so what people do there is they investigate whether an increase in one quantitative variable is associated with a constant increase or decrease in a second quantitative variable. So you're not just looking for just any relationship, any pattern, you're looking for a linear pattern. So if you have a reason to believe that ahead of time, you do a correlational study versus a descriptive study. And so one famous phenomenon that's been studied over and over that was first discovered through observation is that for certain species of crickets, that as the ambient air temperature increases, so do their cricket chirps per minute. And if you're a fan of the Big Bang Theory, you'll know that there was the whole episode where they were debating whether or not it was an ordinary field cricket or some other kind of cricket, and they actually referred to this phenomenon. All right, experiments. This is the best way to establish a causal relationship, okay? That's their whole purpose. They attempt to do that by randomly assigning to subjects to treatments in controlled environments and comparing responses. So I thought I would bring us back to the issue of the number of serving of vegetables per day or fruits and vegetables per day and waist circumference. So it's an observational study if you just observe what people do naturally and they get to make their own choices. Here's the deal. Even if you observe naturally that just taking, counting how many fruits and vegetables people eat in the day and taking their waist circumference measurement, people who are more likely to eat greater numbers of fruits and vegetables may have different overall lifestyles than people who eat no fruits and vegetables or a small amount of fruits and vegetables. They may have a tendency to exercise more and just be healthier in general. And so, or it could be, there could be all kinds of things. Let's just go with that possibility. There's no way to rule that out. There's no way to rule out that it's the overall lifestyle of the people who tend to eat more fruits and vegetables that actually causes the smaller waist circumference. There's no way to rule that out, just by observation. So that's where an experiment comes in. So for an experiment, say you get 300 people to agree to be in your experiment. You might randomly assign, draw names out of a hat. The first 100 people are assigned to have 9 servings of fruits and vegetables per day. It's recommended that you have 5 to 9. These people have 9. The next 100 maybe have 5 servings of fruits and vegetables each day, and then the remaining 100 have no servings of fruit and vegetables each day. What you would probably do is take a measure of the waist circumference of each individual at the beginning of the study, and then have them be on this diet for 3 months, and then come back and measure the circumference of their waists after 3 months, and then look at the average change in waist circumference size. Or you could just, that way you can get a before and after measure. You can actually measure the effect of being on a 9 servings a day diet versus a 5 servings a day diet versus no servings a day diet. And as long as you've randomly selected people to do all that, or randomly assign them to treatments, then you have eliminated the possibility that that it's their personal lifestyle that makes a difference, because those who exercise are still going to exercise whether they have 9 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, or no servings of fruit and vegetables a day. So that variable would be operating equally on all 3 groups. And so it's not going to, because it's affecting all of them in the same way, it's not going to affect one group more than the other, so the difference can be attributed to the difference in diet. Okay, so let's switch to qualitative designs. Okay, for qualitative designs, one type is by doing a participant observation. So this is when you're interested in a group and you want to know what's going on in a group. What this one does is it requires the researcher to become an accepted group member as the researcher records observations. So if we wanted to study the phenomenon of being a dance mom, you couldn't just watch the TV show. You can't just go to dance studios and watch dance moms. What you would do is you would have to actually get accepted in a group of dance moms and pose as a dance mom yourself, which would be difficult for our male students, but that's what you would have to do. So if I were interested in doing this, I would have to get some little girl to pretend to be my daughter and then go and actually try to hang out with this group of women and get them to accept me as one of their own and make observations as an insider. That kind of sends shivers down my spine, but that's what I would need to do. Direct observations are a little easier. They require the researcher to be as unobtrusive as possible while remaining outside the group as the researcher records observations. And here's a picture of Jane Goodall observing the chimpanzees. I don't know, maybe they accepted her as one of their own, but I'm thinking probably they realized she was different, and so her research design would be a direct observation. Structured interviews. This is what many of you will do because this is where surveys come into play. This requires the researcher to ask the same series of questions to every participant. And like I said, it can be a survey sent out online. It can be sent in the mail. You can do a face-to-face interview, but you have to ask the same questions of every single person. You can't let your conversation go off on a tangent. If you want a little more flexibility, you can have an unstructured interview. This allows the interviewer to follow the arc of the conversation after initial guiding questions or core concepts are discussed. So if you find something very interesting with a particular person, you can just kind of run with that. It's a little more challenging to do data analysis with an unstructured interview than it is with a structured interview, but you may come across some really rich pieces of information with the unstructured interview. So it's not like one's better than the other. They just serve different purposes. Now here we've got a cartoon that says, we're sick of asking the same old questions to each applicant, so we've decided to be flexible and creative. What's your favorite football team? Well, it's not like that. You can't just ask anything. You can't just be nosy and ask whatever you want. It's got to be related to the topic at hand. Okay, another qualitative design that can be very useful is a case study. They require that the researcher to study a specific individual or specific context in great depth. So you really want to have just tremendous depth in a case study. I actually had to do a case study when I was working on my master's of a gifted student. And so I chose Denise Edgington, great girl. I interviewed her parents, I interviewed her, I interviewed former teachers, I looked at artifacts of her work, I'd taught her, so I knew just how bright she was and is, and it was very interesting to learn all kinds of information about Denise. Luckily, I was friends with her mom, and her mom was a fellow math teacher in my former school district, and so that worked out really well, I learned so much from that. Another example of a case study is the documentary Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead. This guy was fat, sick, and nearly dead, and he decided to do juicing in order to get all his nutrition but very little calorie intake. And it's really an amazing story to watch. Collection of artifacts and texts. This requires the analysis of text and artifacts for a specific purpose. It could be anything from studying a speech, presidential acceptance of the nomination speeches, looking for evidence of rhetorical devices, as Callie did with her research. You're just using actual historical documents, actual texts of speeches or papers, and you're looking for specific information. And that's another example of a qualitative design. Okay, guys, those are some different types of research methodologies, research designs that you may want to use. You may want to do an investigation of a collection of artifacts and texts for one hypothesis that you have, and you may want to do a survey for the other one. You may be able to take care of all your hypotheses with a survey. One of you may want to design an experiment. That's fine. All of these choices are open to you, or you may want to come and ask, well, can I combine these two? And you probably can. I mean, that's what mixed methods research is all about. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. I hope this has really got you thinking about exactly what kind of research you want to conduct.